Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the X-Plus Godzilla 1954 train version. And unlike all the other X-Plus I've reviewed so far on my channel, this figure originally came out in the year that I'm shooting the review. This is a 2016 X-Plus release. This is not a diamond reissue like all the other ones I've done. This is a straight up Japanese import. And I debated picking this guy up, and the more pictures I saw of him just made me really want this figure. This isn't a suit accurate representation of Godzilla 1954, unlike all the other X-Plus I have that are supposed to look just like the costumes from the movie. This is a super stylized version to look crazy and terrifying and awesome. And I really wanted it because not only does it depict the original 1954 Godzilla, but it also kind of has some GMK elements that I really liked. There's a lot to look at in this guy, so let's jump right in. As is commonplace with X-Plus, you do have to heat up the body here to insert the tail. The tail comes separate in the package. You kind of see the seam back here, but they do a good job of giving it a rough edge to try to disguise it a little bit. One thing to be wary about when you are inserting the tail, these two dorsal spines, the one on the main body and the first one on the tail here in the center, do pretty much touch, so just be very careful putting those together and make sure you don't rub any of the paint off. But overall, the seam's not super noticeable, and the tail goes in pretty easily. I didn't have to freeze it or anything like that. The other bit of assembly that was required is this center section here of the train. As you can kind of make out here, there's a part of the train in Godzilla's mouth that's always there. It's sculpted in there. There's another piece in his hand, but there's a separate little piece of this center section of the train, and it does just peg right into those existing sections. It takes a little bit of time to kind of get it aligned just perfectly. I had issues where there were some gaps that I didn't want on either end of the train. It's still not perfect. There's still a little bit of a gap right here, but I'm just gonna live with it. I did not heat up the vinyl to do this. The peg seemed so tiny, I was kind of afraid that heating it up was just gonna cause a mess more than it was gonna help, and it seems to have turned out decent. The sculpt on this figure is ridiculously cool. As I already said, they did a stylized take on the 54, and whoever sculpted this just went nuts with it and made it look like a true terrifying monster. Another thing that should be noted with this figure is that it's done in a grayscale, a black and white type look. To me, that's not super noticeable because there's nothing really in here that looks like it would be demanding color anyway, except maybe the teeth could be yellowed or something. If you take a look at that eye, you can see they gave him the dead eyes, very similar to the GMK Godzilla, with a little pug nose up there at the front. And then we have some seriously nasty looking teeth, some big fangs coming off the sides, and some sharp teeth in the middle. It's hard to show here on my video setup, but if you look at the train itself, the train is translucent plastic, or translucent vinyl. You can actually see through the windows, which is really, really cool. Great attention to detail there. Top of the train almost looks kind of Lego-ish. It has those little compartments. I think those are supposed to be hatches. You can see the doors sculpted in there. And then when he's biting down on it, you can see all the wreckage and crinkled and crumpled metal. But one of my favorite details on this figure is that there's actually sculpted and painted teeth back there behind the train car in his mouth. Now looking a little closer, there is kind of a seam that runs around the top of his head. It looks like the top of his head was a separate piece glued on after the fact, and that's how they got the train positioned. But it's not a very noticeable seam, and the detail of having those teeth behind the train just really set this figure off for me. It's a minor thing, but very cool. We do actually have his ears back here, and then we do have the dorsal plates going all the way down his neck. Very irregular, very sharp and spiky looking. They're also done in a very light white, which really accentuates them across the charcoal gray of his skin. Speaking of that skin, they have given it a lot of texture here. It's very, very deeply scaled, all these different cracks and crevices through it, giving it a very uneven look, a very scarred look, which I also associate with the original Godzilla. And they really did that to an extreme with this stylized version. We do get a little bit of bagginess here around the neck, which looks pretty good. And of course, you can follow that train coming out. We got the middle section, which is pretty much intact. Once again, you can see through all those little windows, which is so cool. And then coming down to his left hand, where he has a death grip on that train. You can see the train crushing under his grip there. You even get a really good look here at the wheels because it's the underside of it a little more exposed. You can see the wheels sculpted in there on the bottom, but this is just fantastic looking. His gray nails digging in there. The hand is really nicely sculpted. The arm itself looks very big and bulky and baggy, which fits with that 54 look. His other hand, a little harder to see here, but has big open gripping pose with very long sharp nails on it. I think it looks fantastic. Another kind of interesting detail in this figure, they gave him a very defined chest, a very muscular looking upper torso, which I think works really well for the character. Gives him a very cool sense of power and just destructive capabilities. And this is also the section of the figure where the dorsal plates start getting bigger. All of them very irregular, very jagged looking, which I think is fantastic. They start getting the dark charcoal gray here in the middle and then having just the white tips to them, as opposed to the ones near the head that are pretty much all white. And we do get a total of 5 rows. We have the 2 very tiny rows here on the outer side, the somewhat larger ones here on the edges, and then we have the very big spikes here in the middle. And beyond just being irregular, they kind of twist and turn. You can even see down here at the bottom, there's one that's almost at a 45-degree angle, kind of sticking off to the side, giving it just a very organic and kind of suit-ish look. And I don't know if it's because I just reviewed that figure, but the lower torso here reminds me a little bit of the King Kong versus Godzilla suit, where it gets very bulky there at the thighs, very bulky there at the crotch, but it continues on that great sculpted scale detail. Also, all over all this, it's a nice charcoal gray, but they did kind of a lighter gray dry brushing effect over everything that really helps highlight the scales. And then another detail I absolutely love, we come down here to the leg, so they come down to the knee, they go back, and then we get this back bent kind of leg coming down to the foot, which is a really interesting detail. It gives Godzilla a little more of a reptilian look, which is just fantastic. And then the foot itself is crazy. Look at all the cracks here on the toenails. They look very menacing and cool, and I just absolutely love this sculpted detail here on this figure. There is nothing on the bottom of the feet, no sculpted detail. We do get some copyright info. But while we're looking at the underside of the figure, it should be noted that I have the standard version. This is the normal release, not the Rick Boy exclusive. The Rick Boy exclusive comes with a display base showing more of a destroyed city, and it has a different tail. The tail on the Rick Boy is actually flattened here to sit across the base, so that if you take it off the base, he wobbles a little bit. Mine, because it's not meant to have a base, has more detail here on the bottom. You can see the different kind of scales and texture here of the tail, and that rests on the ground and gives Godzilla a nice balance without a base. The tail has a nice sculpt to it too. It comes down to the ground and then loops back up. And then we kind of have these swoosh back here heading towards the tip of the tail. The spines are done throughout the whole thing in that nice vibrant white, and it looks fantastic. And I feel like they gave it a more natural flow instead of kind of being able to pinpoint where a wire might be. I guess if it really was a suit, it would be around here because that's where the tail starts flopping down again. But this looks a little more organic than we see with some of the, especially Showa era Godzilla suit figures. For a size comparison, here he is next to the Tokyo SOS Godzilla from X-Plus, which I have not reviewed yet. I'm going to wait just a little bit until I review him, so I figured I might as well throw him in this video just to give him a cameo. And here's the 1968 version, the one I've been using most in my videos as a comparison point. And you can see these two stand roughly the same height. I was honestly convinced from some of the notes on the website I ordered this Godzilla from that he might be a little taller. The listing on the site listed him as 14 inches tall as opposed to the 12 inches tall that these figures normally stand. And then I remembered that that's probably measuring the box, not the figure. So he is pretty much a standard 30cm height. And just because he reminds me so much of the GMK Godzilla, here is my Bandai Theater exclusive GMK figure. This is the 8-inch scale Bandai figures. So you can see he does tower above that. And overall, I think this figure is absolutely phenomenal. I could not stop geeking out over this thing for several days after I first got him. I actually had this thing delivered to my office at work because I was afraid I wasn't going to be home to sign for it when it showed up. And it was really amusing to see my coworkers' reactions to this giant Godzilla sitting on my desk. Though I think by this point they all know I'm pretty obsessed with Godzilla. I'm sure this figure's not going to be for everyone. It's not a movie accurate representation of Godzilla. It's a very stylized piece, but it is a beautifully done stylized piece. I am so glad I picked it up. I have absolutely no regrets in grabbing this guy. So this figure gets a very, very high recommend. Maybe my favorite X-Plus. I keep trying not to rank these things as I go through them because a lot of times the newest, shiniest one in my collection tends to kind of become my new favorite, but holy freaking crap, this thing is cool. I would definitely rank him up there with the Gigan and Anguirus, which have been some of my favorites so far. Make sure you follow me on Instagram using Outside the Box Reviews, where I did post some really cool pictures I took of this guy a little while back. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And until next time, this has been our Outside the Box Reviews, Giant Monster Mania. Stay tuned for more to come.